Well, hello from Brussels. I'm François Heinderyckx. I'm a professor of media sociology and political communication here at Université libre de Bruxelles. I've been involved with ECREA and with the Doctoral School for many years now, and over the years I've helped in any way I could, but one of the things I've done most often is organize some kind of lecture or workshop around the theme of oral presentations and the use of visuals in making oral presentations. These workshops or lectures came handily for students usually because you have to present your own research within this program, as you have to do often, I assume. So those tips that I will share with you, you might want to implement them immediately. And so what we would normally do is, if it's a workshop, we would of course practice that together, but also during the course of the few days we spent together, you could have walked to me at coffee break or any time to ask for specific advice or some questions about how you can improve your presentation skills. So because we are all stuck at home because of the pandemic, and that's not going to happen. So what I propose we do is that if after watching the short slideshow with voiceover that will follow this, if after watching that you have any questions or you want any specific advice, you should not hesitate to reach out to me, either using the Moodle platform for the program, or just sending me an email, and I'll be happy to help you by replying to your message or by organizing a quick chat online. And so really you should not hesitate. The fact that we are physically separated should not hinder your capacity to get advice from me and all the other lecturers within the school. So here it comes, a few tips to share with you, and I'll also send you links to some documents that you can use to get some of those ideas or thoughts about the best way to make an oral presentation and the best way to use visuals if you need them. In the process of doing academic research, we do a lot of communication, if you think of it. Throughout the process, we'll communicate with the team, we'll communicate with the subject we're studying, we'll be communicating with the authorities that fund us, but most importantly, at the end of the process, when we actually produce knowledge, we will want to share that knowledge, both for validation of that knowledge, but also for sharing that knowledge with others who might benefit from it. So that dissemination and communication of research is not just something important, it's something which we need. It's something required at the core of doing research. There are several ways to communicate our research or doing our research, and one of them is, of course, to do publications, to do papers, to do conferences, to do workshops. But all in all, we do a lot of oral communication. We find ourselves often standing in front of an audience or sitting in front of our webcam to explain what we're doing and explain what we got and how we got there. The fact that we do those presentations so often makes us kind of unaware of how important they are, but also how cautious and careful we should be into making the best of those oral presentations. It's not something that we should take for granted. It's not something that we do naturally. It's something that can be improved if we do it properly. And by doing it properly, we increase our chances of convincing others about the relevance of what we did, or convincing others of the importance of funding us if it comes to that. So our presentation, although it seems quite common, quite banal in our daily work, should probably get a little more attention. And what I'll be trying to do today is to give you a few tips as to ways you can make oral presentations better and more efficient. Of course, you'll be doing at least one. So let's start from the beginning. when you are preparing for a presentation, the first thing you should ask yourself is, what are the main ideas, the main messages that I want to convey during that presentation? In my experience, unless you're doing a really long presentation, those ideas or messages should not be more than 3, 4, or 5. If you go into high numbers of ideas, you risk creating confusion and projecting a sense of superficiality. So usually a small number of core ideas that you will take time to really explain properly will make a better impression and be more efficient than trying to squeeze more ideas into the time allocated. Then you should try to think about ways to tell the story, ways to organize your narration, and how to present those few ideas that you've decided to share with the audience. And then you will have to ask yourself a very basic question that actually we often forget to ask ourselves. And that is, to tell that story, do I actually need visuals? Will it help me convey my message to show visuals while I speak? Why do we not think about that? Why do we not ask ourselves that question usually? Well, that's because we usually take it for granted that making a presentation comes with a PowerPoint, comes with some kind of visuals. In fact, when you go and you're invited to a workshop, to a presentation, usually you ask, can you send me your PowerPoint? Do you have a USB key? And if for any reason you say, well, no, I don't, people are usually worried. They'll think you're not prepared. They'll think that you've lost them somehow, that something's wrong. And that's the wrong way to look at it. It's perfectly all right to tell a story and to make a presentation without any visuals. You should only use visuals if you need them. You should only use visuals if they help them make you communicate, if they help you make your point. You should only use visuals if they enhance your message. So if it's just to have a visual behind you with bullet points, just sort of presenting or putting a few words in writing that you're trying to say orally, that's actually just going to be a distraction. That's not very helpful. You don't need that. But if you are talking about something which is complex and which can be best understood by showing a drawing, by showing a picture, or by just creating a sort of a climate, then go ahead and do the visuals if they help you. In some cases, you might actually just do a visual presenting yourself, putting your name, affiliation, contact details, and having that as a background is actually useful for people to write it down if they need it to, but having nothing else will help them and in fact encourage them to focus on you and on your talk and on your words. If you decide that you need visuals, then comes the time to decide what you want those visuals to be and to try to see what kind of picture or text you want to show on the screen behind you or next to you while you speak. Sometimes you'll want to think about the narration and the visuals simultaneously. There's no reason why you should first think about the way to tell the story, then think about the ways you can enhance it with visuals. Maybe you'll feel inspired to think about the narration and the visuals simultaneously to make sure that you integrate properly the words and the visuals as you develop them. To make your presentation as successful as possible, there are certain key elements to keep in mind. The first of them, and probably the most important, is time management. When you prepare for a presentation, you need to be prepared to manage your time properly. In every possible scenario, you will have a clear indication of the time you are allowed. If you don't, then ask for it. If it's at a conference, it might be just 12 minutes. If you are a keynote, it might be 20 or even 30 minutes. If it's your PhD viva, it might be half an hour. If it's a meeting with your head of department, it might be 10 minutes. Whatever the time, you have to know in advance how much time you have. And you have to make sure that whatever you prepare will fit within that time comfortably. If you don't, that's a basic sign of the absence of professionalism on your behalf, because if you can't stick to the rules, if you can't stick to the time you were given, it gives immediately the impression of someone who's underprepared, or someone who doesn't really care about the rules, or someone who's just incapable of sticking to the point, or sticking to what he or she has prepared. So again, this is usually overlooked. And if you go to conferences, you'll find that actually, in my experience, most speakers actually struggle to keep their time. So it becomes stressful for the audience, then it becomes stressful for the chair of the session, who has to, show you signs that your time is almost up, now your time is up, now you're over time, now you need to conclude, now you need to stop. This is all very stressful for the speaker, for the chair, and for the audience. So why do that? You know in advance how much time you have just about no excuse to go overtime. And the recipe for success in time management is very simple. It's preparation and rehearsal. Whenever you are prepared for your talk, then just rehearse. Do as if you were doing the actual talk, just by yourself, in front of a mirror, in front of a friend or a colleague, and just see if it fits the time you were given. If it doesn't, then do it again. Change the text. Don't try to speak faster if you go over time. If you go over time, it means you put too much into your talk, and so you should just reduce the amount of words. Don't try to squeeze more. Try to take out whatever is left and doesn't fit into the time that you were given. So time management is really key. It's really crucial, and it's usually overlooked for some obscure reason, because it's really simple to manage if you think of it. It's just a matter of preparation and discipline. In order to keep that time, so you will have to go by what I would call an economy of ideas. This goes back to what I told you, that you should usually just stick to 3, 4, 5 ideas for most presentations, but at least make sure you adapt the number of ideas to the time you have. If you try to squeeze too much into it, you're not going to impress anyone. Too many ideas in too little time gives inevitably a sense not of richness and density, it gives a sense of superficiality, and you don't want to project superficiality when you do an academic presentation. So make sure that the number of ideas you're presenting fits the time and the means that you are given for that particular presentation. Along the same lines, once you've decided how many ideas you want and what ideas you want to fit into your talk, go by the economy of words. You don't need to speak like a telegram or try to speak like a Twitter feed with just as few words and short sentences as possible. It's just a matter of trying to be efficient about it. So don't repeat yourself. Don't make sentences too long if you can make them shorter. Pick the words that will go straight to the point and straight to the idea, to make sure you don't waste too many words, because wasted words are wasted time, and wasted time are wasted opportunities to convey your message. Go by also the economy of visuals. If you decide that you need visuals, and that's just fine, if you decide that you need them, you don't need visuals for everything that you say. You don't need visuals for every sentence you pronounce or every ideas you convey. I mean, some might need visuals, some might not. So just, again, put visuals where you need them, how you need them, how many you need them, and don't feel compelled to go through a deck of dense slides just because that's the way you usually see it. Go by the economy of visuals, because visuals are cumbersome if they are not useful to your talk. Just go for the visuals that help you. Go for the visuals that enhance your message. Don't go for visuals that just sort of accompany you, because you don't need that. And of course, the last and most important of all advice for successful presentation is, of course, to prepare, but also to rehearse and then improve based on that rehearsal. It's boring to rehearse. It feels ridiculous sometimes if you are alone to do your presentation in front of a mirror or in front of your webcam, although we grew used to doing just that. I'm doing just that as I speak. I'm speaking in front of a webcam, and I'm doing some of these slides over and over again until they are reasonably good to send to you. But if you go onto any kind of oral presentation, you should do just that. Rehearse, get feedback, improve until it resembles what you are trying to achieve, until it fits into the time you were allocated. Now, try to summarize what good visuals are. First of all, they are what you want. You should absolutely feel free to do the visuals that you want, and you should be creative about it. Don't let yourself being imposed by templates, by Microsoft or others, or by just what you tend to see around you, which is just bulleted list of words. Just try to close your eyes and hear yourself do the talk, and imagine that screen next to you or behind you, and try to see what would you like to see on that screen, which would really help you convey your message across. And therefore, a good visual should be seen as something which is an enhancement to the words that you use, an enhancement to the talk. It should be supportive. It should support what you're trying to say. It should support you in trying to say it. And in some cases, it can be illustrative. It should be something which shows not exactly what you're talking about. It could possibly show something which is related to or is an illustration of the things you're talking about. All that sets a coherent visual landscape that will really help your talk. Good visuals should not be. What should you avoid? They should never be a distraction. So many of the visuals that we see in oral presentations are just distraction. They show you things which actually take your attention away from the speaker because they are not exactly consistent with what the speaker is saying. I've seen some horrible things over the years, and you should do the same. Pay attention to a presentation that you see and try to note what you like and what you don't like. Among the things I really don't like in oral presentation is people trying to use visuals as an overflow of what they couldn't fit in their talk. So they have so much to tell you, and they couldn't resist telling you things which wouldn't fit into their talk, and so they put them partly on the visuals. They might even say it explicitly. I've heard someone say, oh, there's this interesting research we did last year. I have no time to talk to you about, but here are the main results of that particular report. And by doing that, the person was thinking that he was using a good trick to actually squeeze more into his presentation than he could do in the time that he was allocated. But actually, he was putting the audience in a really uncomfortable position because what he was presenting in that table was actually interesting. So you had to choose whether you would listen to the rest of the talk or whether you would actually look at the table and the conclusions of that other study that he cannot talk about. So actually there was two competing speeches on the screen and on the podium, and that's a horrible thing to do because what you do is you create a distraction. The same is true if you try to make an addition and therefore if you want to do a rival presentation on the screen. It can also be if you make a good joke on the screen. If you do really long presentations, or if you do actually teaching for that matter, it's a good thing to do a little joke, a little something funny every now and then. It will help actually your audience focus, paradoxically. But if you are doing a short presentation at a conference, or if you're doing a presentation in front of a panel or some kind of authorities, doing the joke will actually create a distraction which is unlikely to help you convey your point. Another thing you should really avoid when you do the visuals is go for the transcription model of the visuals. It's what I call the karaoke model of the slides. And you see that very often, unfortunately. You see people write it down almost the full text of their presentation, either as compact paragraphs on the slides or as just a long list of bullets. This is something to be avoided entirely, except in the very specific situation of when you're facing an audience where some members, you know for a fact, are not very comfortable with the language you're using. And when that happens, the fact that you are using full sentences and a lot of words on the visuals is helpful for them. It's almost like it was undertitles of your talk, because if they don't hear you, if they don't understand some of the words that you pronounce, they might recognize them when they see them written. Other than that, it's a really bad idea to go for the full transcription of your talk. Again, it's heavy, it's a distraction, and it's not helping you. It's taking the gaze away from your face and from yourself, and that's not something you want to do. Likewise, and it's often a consequence of trying to do a transcription, is the microfilm slides. When you try to squeeze too much into one single slide, you tend to make everything smaller. And when you do that, because you don't know exactly the side of the screen you might have, maybe people won't actually be able to see the details that are meaningful, that are useful. So what you should do is not put so much onto one slide. You can do more slides. You don't need to put every idea onto one single slide. You might want to do 2, 3, 4, 5 slides. It doesn't cost you anything to do more slides. It's not as if you were doing a book where more pages means more paper and more paper means more cost. When you do slides on the screen, you can do 1,000 slides. It's not going to cost you more than to do 2. So, avoid microfilming. Try to consider the cognitive comfort of your audience and make it appeasing, make it easy to decipher, make it easy to read. And another thing you should avoid is having your slides necessarily continuous. You don't need, and many people take that for granted, unfortunately, so we are sort of trained into doing that, but you don't need one slide or one piece of slide for every word that you utter. You don't need to, this is not like something holding your hand throughout your talk. For some of the things you say, visuals are useful, do a visual. For other things, you don't need visuals, don't do visuals. And actually there's something I do oftentimes, and I encourage you to do the same, is when you say something which doesn't require a visual, then not only do you not do a visual, you make any visual disappear. You don't want to have the visuals of the previous idea as a background when you talk about the next idea. If you don't need visuals, take them off the screen. So either you include into your slideshow a blank slide, a black slide, and when you do that, it's magic. Try it. All the gazes in the room actually turn to you. Well, it might be a bit intimidating, but at least it shows that people, all of a sudden, when there's no distraction, their gaze is on you, their attention is on you, and therefore your message will get through all the better. And actually, if you want to improvise a blank slide, if you are in the middle of a talk and all of a sudden you realize that there's this slide behind you which actually is unrelated to what you're trying to say, I mean, you might not know that, but whether you use PowerPoint or Keynote or almost any of those presentation software, all you need to do is go to the keyboard in front of you and push the button with the letter B as in black. And what happens is, the screen will go black. And push a button again and it will go back to the slide. Push the key that says W as in white, and all of a sudden your screen will be white, even if you didn't insert a white slide or a black slide. Again, you don't need one slide for every sentence you utter, and if you don't need visuals, have no visuals. Help people focus on you, on your words, and on your talk. All too often, the speech and the visuals are like two shows occurring in parallel, competing with each other, taking place at the same time, and forcing the audience to try to split their brain into following one simultaneously with the other. What you want to aim for is one integrated presentation where speech and visuals are just one presentation and should be perceived as such by the audience. Now, when you actually want to prepare your slideshow, most of the time you'll use some standard software like PowerPoint by Microsoft or Keynote by Apple, or some of the versions in OpenOffice. And all these programs very much work in the same way. You start them and you ask for a new presentation, and they'll offer you a choice of templates, they call them, which are predefined colors and text combinations and boxes where to put your text. And what do? We start them and start filling the boxes and start making slide after slide. Well, that's not the best way to do it. Instead of letting yourself being forced into using those templates, which completely constrain the kind of visuals that you're going to present, you should just think of your visuals as starting from a blank slate. If you use 16 by 9 slides, basically what you have in front of you are a choice of ways to draw pictures, text, put colors on a rectangle of 1920 dots horizontally and 1080 dots vertically. That's your only constraint. Start from that blank sheet and decide what you want to put on it and what kind of visual you want to produce and put in front of the eyes of the audience while you speak. Don't just fill those templates. Think creatively of what you want to show. In doing that, remember, it's your slides. You own them. They'll be what you want them to be, or the best you can get them to look like what you have in mind. They're not Microsoft slides. They're not anybody else's slides. They're your slides. Own them. Then you should ask yourself, how can visuals help me get my point across? How can showing something on the screen create a complement to what I'm talking about at that particular time? How can they enhance my presentation? You should not. And I'm saying this knowing that most people do, including myself. When you're in a hurry and you want to do visuals, what you do is you just fill that PowerPoint template. And that's not the proper way to do it. What you do with that is banal and meaningless visuals, unless you just wanted to do that bulleted list. But most of the time, there are many ways you can do much better by doing more creative visuals, which will be striking, which will be delightful, which will be meaningful, and which again will enhance your message and help you get your points across. So take ownership of your slides and be creative about it. There are no limits other than your technical capacity in using some of these software, but by all means, the poorest possible visuals are filling the templates that you are offered by default. One easy way to plan all your visuals and think about the succession of visuals that you will want to show, not just the different slides, but the different animations if you need them on those slides, is to simply do what professionals call a storyboard. So just take a deck of post-it notes and just sketch really quickly what you would see on the first slide, which probably was going to be a title slide with your name and credits and etc. And then on the second post-it note, show this image, show this text, show this graph, and so on and so forth for all your visuals, and then flip them around and take some out and add some, and just keep fiddling with that storyboard and those post-it notes until you're happy with the overall result, and then start transposing that into the actual visuals. Try to think about, what do I need, where do I find that picture, what software do I need to do this effect or this animation, this and that. I mean, not everything is possible. You might need to trim down your ambitions at some point, but at least you'll have kind of an idea of what you want to achieve throughout your presentation, and then you transpose those rough sketches into actual visuals if you can. Oh, and here's a small detail that I usually tell you about when I'm myself in front of you projecting my slides on the screen. That's a little technical trick which we don't think about, but which is really important. It can really spoil your experience, and that's a matter of contrast and colors when you do those presentations. When you prepare your slides on your computer like I do, and of course here now you see my slide on the computer screen, so there's little chance that there's going to be a big difference between what I have designed, what I have before my eyes, and what you will actually see while you watch this presentation. It is not the case when you are in a typical conference room, because instead of having a sharp contrast computer screen in front of you, what you have is a projector projecting an image on a screen, and that has a quality of rendering which is much lower than your typical computer screen. And one of the easy way to account for that, or to show that, is to look at, or actually you can think back and imagine in your mind what a screen on which you project usually those slides looks like when the projector is turned off. So when you enter a classroom or an auditorium and step in front of the classroom, look back at the screen behind you and it will look white, right? It's a white screen after all. Well, actually, you should consider it a black screen, because when you will project the image like the one you have before your eyes now, the part which is black, actually you cannot project blackness. All you can do is project as little light as possible. So the black on the screen in the classroom will never get blacker than the white screen. And so to simulate the white, the right part of the picture you have before you as I speak, actually you project bright light on that white screen to make it bright white. And so the difference between black and white on your screen is really a high contrast between near black, or actually deep darkness, and white. While when you project it on a typical classroom auditorium, the difference between black and white is actually kind of dark white and bright white, if you like. So that gives you a sense of how less of a contrast there is when you use a projector, particularly if it's an old or bad projector, particularly if there is daylight, or if there's bright light in the room, if there are windows, for example, then it's going to be even worse. And the same is true with the colors that you will project. So if you use color combinations that look so good on your computer, they might look really bad on that screen, and actually some parts of it might be difficult to read or to see, and so you'll find yourself apologizing because people cannot see that graph or cannot see that text. You have to take that into account when you prepare your slides. Try to make them look sharply contrasted to make sure that the text, the graphs, and everything that needs to be visible really is visible. It's a bit of a constraint, but believe me, it will save you a lot of trouble and a lot of disappointment when you'll find yourself in that room where the projector is old and bad and there is sunlight in the window, and all of a sudden your beautiful slides are a mess and people can't really see them. It will be embarrassing. So one easy way to avoid that is to make sure your slide show as much contrast as possible at the stage of design. In case you need help or you want to go pro on those contrast issues, there are tools online to help you find color combinations which show sufficient contrast to be shown on screen. One of the ones I like to use is thinkoutsidetheslide.com, which is shown on the screen right now, and which allows you to enter color combinations using RGB scales, and when you enter them, then the website will tell you whether that combination provides sufficient contrast or not. Very useful. In this case, there is sufficient contrast. The test is passed, says the website. In this case, the contrast is insufficient, so there's a risk that when projected on the screen, or even using a bad computer screen, the text will be hard to read because there's not enough contrast between the text and its background. You've heard me rant against the templates offered by PowerPoint or Keynote and others, but actually the part of those templates that bothers me most is the fact that they impose upon you, and most people actually fall for it, the fact that a slide is a title with a bulleted list underneath it. And that's a disaster because most of us do just that, and that has led the world of businesses and academia and public services and everyone using visuals mostly do bulleted lists. And we must stop the tyranny of bulleted lists because it leads to, it has influence, it has impact on the way we think about ideas, concepts, theories, plans, whatever. The bulleted list forces our brain into thinking of anything in linear terms. In the bulleted list, the points in the bulleted list are put on the same plane, on the same level, when most of the time they're not really. There's actually research on this showing that the bulleted list has an impact on our perception of reality if that reality is described and analyzed systematically using bulleted lists. Let me give you a simple example, and if we were in the same room and this were a workshop, I would put you to work at this point, but I'll have to show you by myself. Let's take a simple example of how a doctoral school is about three things. Basically, there are participants, two kinds of participants. There are the PhD students and the other lecturers. Then it's all about content. Content itself is about methods and theories, and then there's a range of activities. Supposedly there would be a lot of discussion and a lot of socialization. So this is the typical bulleted list that one would do in presenting a doctoral school in its three core dimensions and two elements per core dimension. That's a typical bulleted list, a two-level bulleted list. And I think it's not optimal. It's far from optimal. Let me show you how one simple alternative way to present the exact same information in a much more meaningful way. Here it is. So a doctoral school is about PhD students. They are at the center of the doctoral school, obviously. Then it's about discussions, methods, theories, and socialization, all that within the background of, in the frame of the help and supervision of lecturers. See, the same concept, the same words, the same explanations are there, but shown in ways which are not just more colorful. I don't care about the colors. It's the way it is shown, the way it is visualized makes it more meaningful. It conveys more meaning. It enhances my rudimentary explanation of the components of a doctoral school. From the bulleted list to this, there is a gap of sophistication and of richness of information being conveyed as a visual, which is truly enhancing the explanation. Let's take a second example. It's completely fictitious, I assure you. But let's say that one of you is presenting his or her PhD project. It says that my project examines the effect of social media use on children's performance in school. We have a sample of 230 children. Their age is 15, and there's a significant difference among urban children, and there's little difference among rural children. So it's all in there. This is typically the kind of slide you would do to present your PhD project. You open PowerPoint, there's a title, there's a bulleted list, and there you are. And it's not so bad. Except, I think you can do much, much better. How about this? This slide shows the exact same information, but it's just in one neat, clean, sober graph. The graph shows visually there's more difference among urban children than among rural children. You hardly need to say it, but when you say it, people look at the graph and they see it. So there is an enhancement effect of this graph to your explanation. There is the sample size and the age is in there where it belongs, which is like on the side of a graph. It's not that important. It's not as important as the differences found among the children. So this is like a visual which takes a little more time, but which is so much richer and so much more enhancing to the explanation you would give of your PhD project. Okay, here's another one. I just told you I was from Brussels. If people don't know Brussels, I might have to explain what Brussels is. Well, Brussels happens to be a city region. It's located at the center of Belgium. It's actually an enclave within Flanders, which is at the north of Belgium, but it's near the southern border of Flanders, the border with Wallonia. How about that explanation? And that explanation is transposed as text in a bulleted list. That bulleted list doesn't help you at all, and my explanation is obscure. Now, if I give you the exact same explanation using the same words, but showing proper visuals, all of a sudden it makes perfect sense. Brussels is a city region in the middle of Belgium. It's enclaved in Flanders, the northern part of Belgium, but near the southern border of Flanders, the one with Wallonia. My words, you listen to my words while you watch that diagram, and it makes perfect sense. You understand my words much better than without visuals, and much better than with the bulleted list of the previous slide. There is an effect of enhancement of my talk using visuals. This is what you should aim for, visuals that enhance your talk, and not useless bullet point lists. Oh, and a word about animations. You see, this particular visual had a little bit of animation. A little bit of animation is okay. Other than that, you should avoid animation as much as possible unless it brings additional meaning to your visuals. So having the text slide in or spin or do sophisticated things which are so much fun to do and which increasingly the software allows you to do with incredible sophistication, almost like, cinema special effects. They are fun to do, but you should avoid them at all costs in your academic presentations because they look cheap, because they are a source of distraction, because they won't enhance your message. They'll just make you look funny, or they will distract your audience. Animations are useful when they bring meaning. If, for example, you discuss something that is a split between the left-leaning parties and the right-leaning parties, if there is an increasing gap between this and that, when you say that, if the visuals actually slide away from each other, then it makes sense. The animation is an enhancement to the drifting further apart. Then the animation is fine. It's actually a good idea. Other than that, if you talk about this and that, and it comes sliding in from the right, sliding it from the left, spinning from upwards, it's just ridiculous. It is a distraction. It's a waste of energy, and it's not helping you at all. It's actually creating a distraction within your own presentation. One last example. This one's for real. It's from one of my presentations when I was discussing the narratives of onlinement. And I wanted to convey the idea that there were two strongly opposing narratives about onlinement and digital technologies, utopia and dystopia. And there was, in addition to that, any number of less conspicuous narratives, namely curiosity, hedonism, fatigue, and downplay. So typically I could explain that even in more detail with just that bulleted list, two-level bulleted list. And that would be fine, and no one would be offended. No one would be laughing at me. But again, I think we can do much better. Do something which visually helps people understand, something which is, otherwise might be seen as a little complex, but at least if I show something, that which I show should help people get my message. It should enhance my message. And this is what it could look like. For the record, and just so that you are convinced that not everything can be visualized and not every visualization can help you with understanding complex realities, this is a very famous and actual real slide which was produced for the Pentagon in trying to summarize in one visual. I suppose someone has asked for the situation to be summarized in one slide, the stability in Afghanistan, or the conditions for stability in Afghanistan. And you can see how all the components are there. And I'm sure if you were an expert in the situation in Afghanistan, you'd be blown away by how thorough this graph is, except it's so complex that it's not helpful at all. No matter what words, what speech you accompany this graph with, this is in no way an enhancement, except to get one single point across. And maybe that was the point of General McChrystal, who famously said, when we understand that slide, we'll have won the war. Maybe the message that was conveyed is simply that the situation was extremely complex, and much more complex than anyone would think. Now, to end this short presentation, trying to give you some advice about doing oral presentation and visuals, I'd like to tackle one issue which again is not often discussed and should be discussed much more. And that's about a very simple question that you are often asked when you finish a presentation with visuals is, can I have your slides? Will you share your slides? Well, most people, think generously, of course I will. I'll put them, I'll send you by email, or I'll put them on my website. And I'd like to take a minute to think about this and help you think about this. In my view, sharing slides after a presentation is only something you should do if two conditions are met. One is that your slideshow is actually an autonomous narration. I mean by that going through your slides one by one will make complete sense, that the words and pictures combined in those slides are detailed and clear and thorough enough that someone who was not at your presentation would understand you properly. Otherwise, you run the risk of those slides going from hand to hand, and from the hands of those who heard you and know what you meant by that, to the hands of those who were not there, who are friends or colleagues who might be interested by what you said, but who, by just seeing the slides, might completely misunderstand you in ways which might actually be damaging, be counterproductive. And so if your slides are not an autonomous narration, then it is problematic to share them with people who might in the end look at them without having heard your presentation. And so the second condition is that they must then be conceived or later adapted as something that is self-standing. So you can actually, after a presentation, say, well, I'll send you my slides later, but I'll have to rework them, because then you'll fill all the gaps. You'll add to your slides the things that you said, but which are not on your slides. It will be like a completely new deck of slides most of the time, particularly if you use the slides smartly, like I suggested earlier, and just use visuals when you need them. Use visuals as a complement to the talk, not as a subtitle or as a karaoke, as I said, but as something which enhances your talk, but doesn't replace your talk. So if you just have the enhancement, it doesn't work. So else you run the risk of unintelligibility. People will miss your point and will misunderstand you and misinterpret your work. And I like to use as a metaphor to rub in my point the fact that it's as if you were sharing a movie without the soundtrack. You can only share a movie without the soundtrack if it's a silent movie, because then it was designed to make sense without the soundtrack. Otherwise, I would suggest you don't. And it's funny that it's ironic that I've been repeating this for years, and now this year I have to make this kind of movie, this kind of voice-over version of my presentation, where for once it's perfectly all right to share my slides because I share them along with the talk. You have the slides and you have the talk and you have them synchronized, so I have absolutely no issues sharing my slides because I know I'm sharing a movie with the soundtrack and not a movie without the soundtrack while it was not a silent movie. I hope you enjoyed some of that, some of those tips and some of those ideas I shared with you. You don't have to agree with everything I said. In fact, it's healthy to disagree, but at least I hope I've encouraged you to think about the way that you prepare and that you perform your oral presentation, because there are important moments in your career. There are some more important than others, but all of them are significant, and you should really try to do your best and put all chances on your side. There are two texts which you can use, which I've written over the years, which were published in ECREA summer school books, and I'll give you the direct links to those texts, because then you can, of course, have a more detailed and more structured and more systematic approach to these particular issues. Here are the two references with the direct link to download the work. Do not hesitate also to contact me. Here are my details. I miss seeing you for real and interacting with you, so don't hesitate to shoot me an email or ask for a short chat on Skype or any other platform. And you can ask me for advice on your own presentation or on any aspects of this or anything that I can help you with. I'll be in touch with some of you within the actual sessions, but everyone is welcome to reach out to me if need be. Please be safe and enjoy this unusual edition of the ECREA Media and Communication Doctoral School.